Welcome to Garden Plants with Jim Putnam. Let's talk Feather Falls Carex. This is Feather Falls Carex. This is a hybrid Carex that's got what I would call some hybrid vigor. This thing is, this is 1 year in the ground with Feather Falls. We have lots of other Carex in the garden, and this is one of the faster growing Carex I've ever seen. It's got this really beautiful kind of white or off-white striping with on the edges with a green stripe down the middle. It's extremely showy out here in our garden. I met this breeder from Holland a few months back as I'm shooting this, and we were talking about the hybrid vigor that this one really shows. It can fill out a space extremely fast where other Carex, just don't have this ability. So it's a great. We had this one in a container for a while, and it just filled a container really quickly. Popped it in the ground here, and it's done the same thing here. It's just grown to about 2 feet in height and about 3 feet in width with this beautiful weeping habit. This is about as tall as it will ultimately get, because you can see it just weeps down as new pieces come up. They just kind of fall over. So somewhere between 18 inches and 24 inches in height, but it probably can get 4 to 5 feet in width over time. It does have a flower spike on it, typically late spring, early summer. They're kind of brown flowers. They're actually good for pollinators, but they're inconspicuous down in the plant. Some people may want to actually just cut them out if they seem unsightly to you. They don't bother me in any way, shape, or form. All of my Carex do that at some point during the season. Different timings on that. They're hardy in zone 6 to 9 or potentially 5 to 9. I've seen it listed as both. Most of these Carex hybrids that are on the market are hardy in zone 5 to 9, so I don't know if this one is or isn't. Somebody maybe let us know down below the video in the comments if you're growing this and overwintering it in zone 5. It may behave more with a little more dieback or a little bit more browning out during the winter time in zone 5, but may still come back. So this evergreen plant can be mass planted, would work great on a slope. Again, it'd make a great living mulch really quickly because of its hybrid vigor. It grows fast enough that it'll cover up some spots where, to prevent weeds. And of course, I'm not gonna have to mulch very much around something that grows that wide, that quickly. Of course, you can use it as just one specimen plant, which is basically what we've done here. We've tucked it in along a path. It's got other darker green things around it, and it shows itself off and the other things around it with that variegation. Perfect container plant. And again, we had this one in a container for a year, and it filled that container out beautifully. Almost virtually no maintenance to it. Works great as a border plant, but it does get wider than some other Carexes that we might use that we would line up, or as people like plant Liriope or some other slower growing Carexes for that purpose. This one would be, gets pretty big to use as a border really, but also as a ground cover if you just again want to mass plant it somewhere and plant a lot of them, and it'd be incredibly showy with that. Maybe put something in the middle that gets taller, that's dark green, that could really show that off. These are really adaptable to a lot of different conditions, really not that picky in terms of soil. Slightly acidic to neutral soil is best for these, and in well-drained situations. So moist, well-drained soil would be kind of ideal. Very drought tolerant once established, but initially you need to do a little bit of watering on it to get it to that point. And if you go through a really, really dry period of time, you may want to give it some additional water. But again, once it's in there and anchored in pretty well, you don't have to do a lot of ongoing watering on them. Pruning is kind of interesting on all of these new Carexes that we've introduced into the gardens virtually no one was using that many Carexes in gardens, and now there's like 3,000 species or something of Carex around the world, and it's like all of a sudden we're discovering them and hybridizing them and doing interesting things with them, and they're coming into our gardens, and they're just absolutely amazing. So they don't require a whole lot of maintenance. They're really easy. Most of them are evergreen, but they're occasional. You get the occasional maintenance on it. So for me, I'm going to prune this coming out of winter based on how it looks. Most winters for us here in zone 8, it's going to look great coming out of winter, and I really don't have to do anything to it whatsoever. If there's a few pieces that I want to cut back that look a little browned out or something, I can just tip prune them, or I can take it and trace this one all the way back into the plant and cut it all the way back. If you want to get that detailed, that's up to you. If it looks really rough coming out of winter, you can just cut these back, just like you would liriope or any other ornamental grass in your garden. Carexes tend to come back a little slower from that, but this one's got some hybrid vigor, and I think it would just fill out almost immediately from that type of pruning. About every 3 to 5 years, and I will say this with almost any herbaceous plant you have in your garden, whether it's a grass or a Carex like this, which is a grass-like plant, or any other herbaceous perennial you have in your garden, about every 3 to 5 years, they need to be popped out of the ground and divided. And that's going to keep them putting on that juvenile fresh foliage. Otherwise they tend to crowd themselves out. So plan on that about every 3, 4, or 5 years, something like that. When you notice that it's less vigorous and it's kind of crowding itself out, you pop it out of the ground, you cut it in half in the late winter, or cut it into thirds, whatever you want to do, and replant it back in the ground, and that will just return it to its, fast growing kind of juvenile state. These are actually more sun tolerant than Oshamensis, which is a lot of the other hybrid and other named variegated Carexes that we're using in the garden. But I still think that kind of part shade or shade conditions is ideal overall for these, and they'll take dry shade once they're established in the garden. So you can see how we're using it around the border here. There's some rocks next to it, some darker green foliage items, a ground cover in a container, flowering annuals. It just fits in anywhere. You got a little spot like this, boom, you throw this in, and look what it does to this, to this presentation along this bed edge. This really doesn't require any ongoing fertilizing, really. We fertilize this entire garden in the late winter, early spring with an organic fertilizer once, and that's really all, all the maintenance it needs. This is deer resistant, pest resistant, really kind of one of those kind of bulletproof plants that you can add to your garden to add all year-round color. This is going to have year-round interest in the garden, and really shows off the other things. It really brings attention, to all the other things in the garden with that beautiful variegation on this. So this is Feather Falls Carex.